Conversations with Nicole. Let's talk about it. Tell me all about it. I'm here. I want to know what's on your mind. Ooh, the world needs to hear from you, and I'm so glad to have a conversation to reach the nation. And it's all about you. We'll help each other to discover innovative ways to positively change the world. Let's talk about, let's talk about, yeah. Let's talk about conversations with Nicole.
Greetings. Welcome to Conversations with Nicole. I am Nicole Everett, your host, and today is a special broadcast of Conversations with Nicole. Y'all know that we're normally here on Mondays and Wednesdays at 8:30 p.m., but this is part two of a series that we are doing on fair housing. And so today we're going to really dive into fair housing rights. That's our topic today. And my special guest is attorney Keenya Robertson, who is down in South Florida. And I'm going to actually give you information regarding her bio. Mr. Dante Bonner connected us, although I have seen her over the years because she has been to many of the fair housing events that have been here in Tallahassee. And I believe is a Seminole, if I'm not mistaken. So we will get into all of that in a minute. But before we do, we need to hear from you. We are live on Facebook and YouTube, and this is an interactive live. So your comments, your questions are welcome. Fair housing is not just for the month of April. Fair housing is 365. And so we're going to dive into this conversation on fair housing rights from a federal perspective, a state professional perspective, and local and regional perspectives within the state of Florida. So again, I know this is a little unusual because this is not our normal time, but we're going to get some folks on here and get this conversation going. So I'm going to go ahead and share some of Attorney Robertson's bio. She has dedicated her professional career to advocating for fair housing and other civil rights since 1994. She is the president and CEO of Housing Opportunities Project for Excellence Incorporated, also known as HOPE. And it is a 35-year-old private Florida nonprofit fair housing organization whose mission is to fight housing discrimination in Miami-Dade and Broward counties and to promote equal housing opportunities throughout Florida. And under her leadership, which began in 2007, the agency has been instrumental in recovering over $6 million. Yes, that's right. I said $6 million in the settlement of housing discrimination cases, and that is worthy of applause. From 1998 to 2007, Mrs. Robertson served as HOPE's Vice President of Fair Housing Programs, overseeing all education, outreach, and enforcement activities conducted by the organization. Before her tenure at HOPE, she was a staff attorney for the Georgia Advocacy's Office's Protection and Advocacy for Individual Rights, say that fast 3 times, program, where she represented the interests of persons with disabilities in guardianship, housing, employment, public accommodation, and entitlement issues. She also worked for Metro Fair Housing Services Incorporated in Atlanta as a project director and attorney for their Southern Regional Fair Housing Organizing Project, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Georgia. Woo! All right. And so Attorney Robertson has been a member of the board of directors for the National Fair Housing Alliance since 2007 and served as chairperson from 2015 to 2024. And she is a graduate of the Florida State University, Go Noles, and the Louisiana State University Law School. So y'all help me welcome Attorney Keenya Robertson.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you. I'm jealous of your theme music, and that's all I have to say about that. I absolutely love it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate. I know you are busy and you got a lot going on, but we appreciate you taking time to talk fair housing rights with us today. So before we dive into this conversation, my question that I ask all of my guests is, "Who are you?" Not what you do, because I just read all of what you do, a little bit of what you do, but who is Keenya Robertson? So let us know.
Ah, well, first and foremost, I just have to thank you for shedding a light on fair housing. It isn't always the loudest issue
Mhm.
in housing, so thank you. Let me just start with that, and thank you for the invitation because I know I can be a little slippery catching hold of me.
We got
Um,
you.
you know, who am I?
Yes.
I'm a human being put on this earth and used by God as an instrument to do His work,
Come on.
uh, and that's who I am, and that is defined for me on a daily basis. It just depends whether it's raising two children who I need to leave here, contributing to this world in a positive way. Standing in a place to help someone, advocate for them, be a voice.
Mm.
It's a blessing. It's an insanely amazing blessing to be used in a way that allows you to make a difference for anybody,
Yes.
and to make a change for the greater good, period.
Love it. Yes, ma'am. Well, again, thank you for the work that you do. If you don't mind, just sharing a little bit about what Hope does. I mean, I read a little bit in your bio, but just kind of give us the quick and dirty on what Hope does.
So I'll start with our mission statement.
Okay.
Well, first, our slogan: "We fight housing discrimination." But our mission is to fight housing discrimination in Miami-Dade and Broward counties, but to ensure equal housing opportunities throughout Florida. And we do that through intake and counseling,
Hmm.
as well as investigations, and also advocacy. And so there's an enforcement. So enforcement actions either through administrative filings or court filings, and then just pushing for support for fair housing and changes in the laws that expand protections for people.
Nice, nice. All right, wonderful. So again, just want to give a frame of reference, let folks know that you're not new to it, you're true to it. And so very highly qualified to speak on this topic. All right. So I see a few folks have joined us. Miss Lisa Harry Jones, who is here. Thank you for being here. And Miss Deanna, who is also here in Tallahassee. We appreciate you so much, so much. So y'all, please like, share, tag a friend, let them know they should be on here, and please engage in this conversation while we have this fair housing guru in our midst. So please ask the good questions for her. All right. So I think a good place to start is by just talking about what the act is.
Okay. So we talk about fair housing. Fair housing is not affordable housing. Fair
Hmm.
housing are the civil rights that have been put into place via law that prohibit discrimination in housing. And you're going to see those prohibitions in different places. You're going to see them in the federal law. What you know is the act, or the Fair Housing Act, is our federal Fair Housing Act. So when people usually say, "Oh, the Fair Housing Act," they're talking about the federal law. But in Florida, we have a Florida Fair Housing Act as well. That's in our state statutes. And in various counties throughout the state, there are additional protections or identical protections that exist in local laws. So Leon County has its own fair housing ordinance. State of Florida has its fair housing law, as does our federal government. And so discrimination will start with the federal law, and the state law is prohibited on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, familial status, and as well as disability.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite thing about the fair housing law is that it's intended to be interpreted in a manner that is broad and inclusive. And what that means is it's intended to protect as many people as possible in as many situations as possible. And one of the places you'll see that is how those categories are defined. So when I say to you, Um, color is anybody of any race. It's just simply the color of your skin.
Yeah.
So you can see discrimination against people of the same race or people with different colors, people from the same country, discriminating against folks on the difference of race, color, that sort of thing. But let's talk about sex, because that's one of the, oh, that didn't sound, it's not as exciting as I just made it sound. That was very salt and pepper what I just offered to you. But sex was intended originally when it was added to the law to really to address gender and discrimination against women. Early on, before the Fair Housing Act and before sex was added as a protection to the Fair Housing Act in 1974, because the Fair Housing Act was enacted in 1968, but in 1974, they included sex. You would see discrimination against women, not only in housing, but in lending. Women of childbearing age weren't given loans, or unless, they had a hysterectomy, because if you were a woman who was working and of childbearing age, they felt that you weren't able to maintain a steady income and to qualify for a loan. We also saw a case law come about where on the basis of your sex, women were subjected to sexual harassment in housing. And we're still seeing that today. And I'm going to tell you where it runs rampant. It runs rampant when we have women who are sitting in affordable housing opportunities. They become vulnerable, and people decide that they will prey upon those women because think about it. If you're a voucher holder, it takes a lot to get into that housing. You find something decent. If you've got children, are you able to keep them in their school?
Yeah.
You're ready to go. And all of a sudden, here is a proposition from a landlord with regard to your housing, some sexual proposition, or, these any affordable housing opportunity, not just voucher holders, but any affordable housing opportunity. As we've all seen the housing market and the costs getting out of control each and every day. Think about finding something that's affordable and being made to leave it, or having to stay there, but being subject to sexual advances or sexual harassment by a housing provider.
Yeah.
But more recently, sex has been interpreted, and actually President Biden, first week in office, issued an executive order where he said, listen, there's a Supreme Court decision in employment cases that say sex has to include sexual orientation and gender identity, because you can't talk about somebody's sexual orientation without talking about their sex.
Right.
Makes perfect sense. So in the interpretation of sex under the Fair Housing Act, sex isn't just your gender, male, female. You're also protected on the basis of your gender identity. So if you identify as other than male or female or non-binary, you are protected under the law, and also on the basis of your sexual orientation. When we talk about familial status, that actually means the presence of a person who is under the age of 18. We're talking about families with children, but the children actually don't even have to be present for there to be protection. If you are in the if a woman is pregnant, the familial status protection is there. Baby might not be in the household just yet, but baby's there with mom. But you could be in the process of adopting a child or fostering a child, and the protection will be in place if there is discrimination in housing because of the child.
Now,
or the presence of a child or children.
Let me pause you there, because I literally last night had a show on teens aging out of foster care. What are the options? So I didn't realize that familiar status, that foster and adoptive, I would assume, but foster children would be covered under as a protected class under familiar status.
Oh yeah, if you're a child, if I'm going to foster a child, they can't discriminate against me, even if that child hasn't made it to my home. If I'm trying to make provisions to bring a child into my home, and they're saying, oh no, they're coming up with arbitrary discriminatory rules. The child's not there yet, but there's still the protection that's in place. Now, understand this: we have auntie and grandma who happen to have niece, grandchild. So you don't have to have legal custody. You don't have to show up with with custody papers for the protection to be in place, with the permission of the parent to have a child in your care. So, that familial status protection will extend. And then when we talk about people with disabilities, it's mental disabilities, it's physical disabilities, it's a mental or physical impairment that impairs a major life activity, walking, breathing, caring for yourself, dressing, people who are HIV positive are protected. There has to be no manifestation of the HIV status. There does not have to be there doesn't have to be AIDS status. Just alone, you're protected by being HIV positive. And so, there are so many people living with disabilities, and the protection extends not only to the person with the disability, but people associated with that person with a disability. If you have a record of having a disability, you don't have the disability any longer, because some disabilities can be temporary. Then your association with the person who has a disability. So that again, that protection is expansive. It's broad and inclusive, as I said, broad and inclusive.
So let me pause real quick. My mom just joined us. Thank you for being here, Ma. She's down in Miami.
Oh, Mom, here in Miami with me.
Yes. And Deanna had a question. She said, is there a bill in place to keep rent affordable? If not, how do you handle rent increase?
So rent increase is not a topic that falls under the Fair Housing Act unless some folks are getting a higher increase than others. If the tenants in the property are Black and their rent's being raised higher than other folks who are not, or they're not being raised at all, that would be there. But we don't have rent control here in Florida. In New York, there is rent control. We do not have rent control in Florida. And the sad part about it is that I believe that when you have a shortage of affordable housing opportunities, it opens the door for discriminatory practices.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
But there is, but directly answering the question, no, there isn't a bill. And sadly, what we're seeing is it's almost like Wall Street taking over the housing market.
Yeah. I see Sister Glover has joined us. She's here in Tallahassee. Thank you for tuning in. So, all right. So you gave a great, again, foundation on the act, protected classes, what's been added. What about on a state level? Are there any nuances that we need to be made aware of as it relates to the Fair Housing Act or any rights that are currently out there?
So our state law is substantially equivalent to our federal law.
Okay.
And so what that means is that the Florida Commission on Human Relations, and those of you all who met Dante Bonner, that's one of their staff members. The Florida Commission on Human Relations is responsible for enforcing our state law. And what the state of Florida has is certification from HUD that our law is substantially equivalent. It's not exactly the same, but it's substantially equivalent in its protections to the federal law. Okay. So when we file complaints with HUD, they usually send them to the Florida Commission unless there's a local agency that has a contract with HUD. So in our state right now, there isn't necessarily anything that's different. We're substantially equivalent, and so far holding steady with regard to our protections. The state of Florida needs additional protected statuses for our residents and for our citizens and voters in this state.
Okay.
The state law should be expanded.
Okay. So are there any overlays that maybe Dade and Broward do?
So Miami-Dade County has an application in, as I understand it now, for that certification, but Broward County has the certification and has had the certification. Gotcha. The same exists in Orlando, et cetera. So when they have the certification, when you file a complaint, it's dual filed with HUD. But one thing that can occur with a local law or county laws, they're going to have those same 7 protected statuses that I shared with you, which is race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, disability. But Broward County, for example, we have victims of domestic violence, sexual orientation specifically, marital status, but we got some other one, political affiliation. And I didn't understand that one until recent years. It's like, do we really need protection against discrimination on the basis of our political affiliation? Today, I'm going to say yes.
So wait, let's roll that back. So political affiliation, yes, please break that down for us.
Well, political affiliation is a protected status. So if you are discriminated against in housing on the basis of your political affiliation, that is the basis for a fair housing complaint in Broward County. So, and like I said, a long time ago, I was like, really? Many years back, I really didn't get it when I first started working, out of Broward County. I was like, interesting. Don't understand. Today, oh, I get it. And I see where and why it would, where and why it could happen, especially given the current state of our country and politics today. But that is a protected class. We also have victims of, we have military status and veteran status, and victims of domestic violence, human trafficking. So as named protected, and real exciting, Miami-Dade and Broward have source of income. So people who are voucher holders, housing choice voucher holders, Section 8 voucher, HOPWA voucher, which is housing opportunities for persons with AIDS. Veterans have housing vouchers. People who pay for their rent with various legal forms of income are protected from discrimination. So a landlord cannot discriminate against somebody because they are a Section 8 voucher holder or HOPWA voucher holder.
Interesting. All right, I'm gonna try to pull these viewers in, because you are really blowing my mind on some of these other protected classes. Again, this is Miami-Dade and Broward counties that you are speaking of. But what do y'all think about the whole political affiliation as a protected class? Would you all be for that in your area? In terms of being a protected class, let us know. Give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down in the comments if you don't mind. Your political affiliation being something that people consider discriminating you for a housing opportunity. I've never heard of it, but listen, people can discriminate for all sorts of things, right? Let us know in the comments. All right. So those have been added to the South Florida Act or, protections. So, one of the things that I think we have been also seeing in the media is this whole criminalization of homelessness. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's evil. And I have to give you just basic, simple answer. I saw a notice from one city commissioner saying, oh, our homeless population is down. I was like, because you made their very presence and existence against the law. Down here, we've even seen people arrested for feeding people who are hungry.
I've heard that.
So yeah, that part it's really difficult. I think that while we don't have the fair housing tied to it, it's still part of human rights. All of it still falls under the umbrella of human rights, and I think it's despicable. And I just encourage folks. I'm just going to take this time right now because we just had the day before yesterday was our National Voter Registration Day. However, there's still time to vote. Get yourself registered. Get folks registered who aren't. And there are so many places that you can go to find out what the amendments on your ballot mean. You can get a sample. You can take a look at what's on that ballot. And there are many entities, that will offer to you and some are nonpartisan, a lot are nonpartisan, that will offer to you, and also some you can find like on your local news stations, they'll offer to you what the different sides, who's for this, who's against it, and why. They offer that to you to help you make a decision. And even when you see, it's important, to know when you're voting for those judges and those, if you just Google their name, you might be able to find out something about them that says, hey, I should support this person, or hey, I should not. I should oppose this person because, what they stand for is or is not in line with my values or what I think we need. So I just have to take that time, because that's one other civil right that, continues to be in jeopardy in this country. So I, exercise that right, encourage young people, and, take advantage of the information that's out there. There are a lot of groups that are out there trying to get folks registered and to help you understand exactly what you're doing. And I have, I have a 19-year-old who will grumble at me, but get on this Zoom call with your mother, son, because we're going to talk about the ballot, your mail-in ballot that I'm sending to your campus that you're going to send back, and we're going to get this in the mail. But I want you to understand what you're voting for. So, everybody, it's really important, because we've seen a Supreme Court change in composition, and not just the Supreme Court, our appellate courts, our federal courts, our local courts, and the law, protections are getting stripped. Civil rights are being rolled back. And so it's very important. It isn't just that you're voting for a person to hold a particular office. Understand what happens while they're in office, and who gets appointed to make the decisions, and how long they get to stay there making decisions. So it's really important, because just even in fair housing, we've seen, longstanding principles revisited. I mentioned sexual harassment in housing. We here in Florida in the 11th Circuit, in the Federal Court of Appeals, and just a few years ago, the court actually entertained the question of whether or not sexual harassment is housing discrimination under the Federal Fair Housing Act. And it got there simply because the judge who got it in the district court said, there's no decision in the 11th Circuit. There's no decision determining whether or not sexual harassment is covered. What happened to this lady is sexual harassment, but it's not covered by the Fair Housing Act. There's no law, there's no case decision in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals that says so. Now, mind you, all around the country, you had 4 decades of case law that said, listen, sexual harassment is covered by the Fair Housing Act. It is housing discrimination. But these are the kinds of cases we're seeing. The Supreme Court revisited the question of whether or not a rule that is not discriminatory on its face, but is discriminatory in effect, is that covered by the Fair Housing Act? Is that something we can use? And the fact that question even went before the court is frightening, because there again were decades of cases where we said, hey, if you say we only accept people who have wages from a job, who are you discriminating against? You might be discriminating against a mother who can live off her child support, a person with a disability who's living off a different form of income. So your rule just sounded like it applied to everybody and was neutral, when on its face, when you read it, but who did it discriminate against? And, we saw that. If you think about voting rights, to keep people of color, people of African American heritage from voting, they would come up with different rules that on their face, you have to have a high school diploma. When you knew most of the Black folks living in the area, finished 8th grade, 10th grade at that time, or you had to have what they call the voucher. Somebody had to vouch for you. But if all voters were non-whites, and who was vouching for you would be your uncle, your parent, a family member. Well, if all your family members are white, not a problem. But if you're Black, your family members weren't registered voters. They couldn't vouch for you. So these are the kinds of things that are being revisited by our courts, and who can bring fair housing cases. Some of those things are in jeopardy. So it's really important that folks vote and pay attention, to who you're voting for, what you're voting for.
Absolutely. Cannot say that enough. So definitely pay attention to the candidates, what they stand for, if whatever they stand for aligns for your values, and what is their position on fair housing. Some of the things that we're talking about right now. What are their thoughts and their positions on those things? We are right at halfway through our talk. So for those of you who may be just tuning in, I am on with attorney Keenya Robertson, who is with the Hope Center down in South Florida. We're talking fair housing rights. We've talked about the act itself on the federal level, the protected classes, but also the overlays that Miami-Dade and Broward County have done, since that's where she is based. But I want to call attention to a few comments that have been made by our viewers. Ishmael Rentz, who is in Gainesville, says political affiliation. Because of the polarization of our political discourse, we find ourselves in a position that we have to protect individuals from a radicalized electorate. Very well said, Ish. Any thoughts on that comment? Yeah.
Yeah, no, now more than ever, that is the reason. Now, it had been in place for quite some time, but I imagine that was the dynamic that brought it before the commission in Broward County to have the commissioners add it as one of the classes
Indeed.
of protection. But we're seeing it, we're seeing that dynamic stronger than ever more recently. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Rentz.
Absolutely. All right. Miss Cassandra Jenkins has joined us, who is here in Tallahassee. Deanna, she said, that's wild. I guess we have to keep our party affiliation to ourselves now. Listen, for some folks, that might be the case. Sister Glover, she said, has a study been done to ensure the voucher holders are not charged higher rent based on maybe household size and location? Maybe. I don't know. Sister Glover.
I don't know about a study, but I will say this. You know, there the housing providers who accept vouchers and then have other folks that aren't paying, utilizing a voucher, when they sign the documents with HUD, they're supposed to certify that they are not charging higher or different rents to the voucher holders. Now, what is in place for voucher holders are a couple things that help. In many areas, there's what's called a small area fair market rent.
Okay.
I actually rent to a voucher holder, so
Okay.
that's I have a little bit of direct knowledge with how it kind of works at least for us in Broward County, and then we also fight discrimination on the basis of source of income. But what's also in place in many places, that small area fair market rent. So based on the zip code of the property, the payment standard for that voucher should be higher or is higher based on the zip code where that property is located. So that gives folks who have vouchers access to more properties and to areas of opportunity. And but a voucher holder should not be paying more than 30% of their income, but in some circumstances, they are allowed to pay up to 40%.
Okay.
And that's an exception that has to be made by the entity issuing the voucher and determining whether or not that works for that particular family. It's not an automatic, but because of the housing market and the price of rental housing, I think more and more families are having to increase their portion of the rent so that they can secure housing. Just something that simple.
Absolutely. All right. Good question. Thank you for sharing that. So we've talked, political affiliation. We've talked a little about source of income. Is there anything else that is on the horizon that we need to be made aware of as relates to our fair housing rights?
Well, again, just protecting them first and foremost. But what I will do is share just a little bit of information. So what we're seeing in 2024, what was released is a trends report by the National Fair Housing Alliance. They collect all the complaints that are taken in by HUD, places like Florida Commission, state, local governments, as well as the private groups like Hope.
Mhm.
who receive complaints of housing discrimination. And so we have this year received more complaints ever in the history of the collection of that data,
Mm.
um, in 2023. And that was the same dynamic, but breaking the record from 2022 complaint data, where we had seen the highest. So
Oh,
they
wow.
continue to climb. People continue, I believe, to recognize their rights. I think some forms of discrimination are the result of folks who are emboldened
Mm.
uh, by just the current climate.
Yeah.
Uh, and hopefully it means that people are reporting housing discrimination as they're experiencing it. We continue to see disability as
Mm.
the number one basis of discrimination. It used to be race. And
Mhm.
it can change in specific geographies, but the country's number one basis of disability,
Yeah.
of discrimination complaint is disability. I mean,
Mhm.
so many people living with disabilities and people needing accommodations and modifications, and so many housing providers not really understanding what their responsibilities are under the law. So we continue to see that, but that doesn't mean that the race complaints aren't there. And also the discriminatory policies where families with children are concerned. There are a lot of families that they're in housing, so they don't raise issues so that they can remain housed, or out of fear of losing their housing opportunity. So definitely wanted to raise awareness there.
Mhm.
And we saw an increase in sexual orientation discrimination complaints.
Mm.
And I believe that that's the result of the clarification or the expansion of the protection of sex, including sexual orientation, because it was not protected under our federal law, and it was not protected under our state law.
Okay.
Uh, Explicitly, but
Mhm.
now it is in the interpretation of what sex protection means under the law. So when the Florida Commission on Human Relations is now required to accept complaints of sexual orientation as an entity funded by HUD to investigate complaints of discrimination, HUD is responsible for receiving and investigating complaints on the basis of sexual orientation, where that had not been the case before the president's executive order. So I believe that's why we're seeing the uptick there.
Mhm.
And then we also, during the pandemic, you had people who were locked up, shut down with their abusers.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, when you have a person who is the victim of domestic violence or dating violence, et cetera, too often there are rules that the housing provider has. For example, if the police come to your unit 3 times, you're out, and it
Mhm.
and it doesn't account for who's calling and why.
Yeah.
And so, people who are calling law enforcement for protection from an abuser, sometimes they're chilled from making that call because they know that there will be some kind of negative action taken by their housing provider.
That's
So, you
unfortunate.
know, that was something that we were seeing, and in addition to, like I was telling you, the sexual harassment um, that was in place, or sexual harassment occurring, and in those situations where you had affordable housing opportunities.
Very unfortunate. So, Ishmael came back and talked about political affiliation to the commenter concerning hiding affiliation. Fortunately or unfortunately, voters' selected political party is public record. So, because the comment was, I guess we have to keep our party affiliation to ourselves now in terms of not being discriminated against from a housing standpoint. But he was just making the point that it is public record. So
Right.
I'm curious around, I know the work that you do down in South Florida, and you mentioned that discrimination was one of those. I'm sorry, that disability was, kind of up there. What types of disability, cases or complaints are you currently receiving?
So I think the most common complaint, because disability discrimination can happen in many different ways. There's just discriminatory questions, like questioning whether or not somebody is able to live independently, depending on the type of disability they may have, or there are some stereotypes about the individual that has a disability. But reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications tend to represent the majority of the complaints of discrimination based on disability. So if there's so reasonable accommodations are changes in rules or policies that allow for a person with a disability to use and enjoy their housing or their dwelling. And reasonable modifications are physical changes. So when to units or common areas that allow a person with a disability to use and enjoy. So the modifications are pretty straightforward.
Okay.
If you need ramp, you use a wheelchair, a walker, and there needs to be ramping. Or if a person who uses a wheelchair inside of a unit may need to remove cabinets from underneath the sink to roll up under the sink and utilize the sink. Have environmental controls lowered so that they can reach them, turn lights on and off, thermostats, etc. A housing provider has to allow a person with a disability to make those physical changes at their own expense to the unit, unless that housing provider is federally funded. So that does not apply when you are in public housing or federally subsidized housing.
Yeah.
Not housing providers who just receive vouchers. That's not what's going to trigger additional protections for people with disabilities. But if you've got, so say you're an affordable housing apartment building, but that building is owned by the housing authority, that's a federal program. So they're going to have to make the changes. They're going to have to put those grab bars in the shower for you. But if it's your shower and it's a private apartment and you're just renting it, you have to pay for those grab bars. They have to allow you to do it, but at your own expense. Now, where you're making, say, changes to the common area, you're ramping a step that leads up into the laundry. Well, everybody's benefiting from that ramp. They can't require you to put that back in place. But in your unit, if you've lowered the shelves to hang the clothes, they can require you to put those back. If you remove those cabinets from under the sink, as I stated, as I shared, you got to put those back, because if the next person coming behind you would need or want those cabinets in place, the housing provider can require that they be put back in place. Other things that they wouldn't require, like if you widen the doorway for wheelchair access, they can't require you to put the doorway back to the original more narrow width, that sort of thing, or moving the environmental controls. A person who uses a wheelchair or doesn't use a wheelchair can reach the light switches and the thermostat at the height that they are placed for a person who uses a wheelchair. So it's going to be that. And then, of course, that emotional support animal.
I was about to ask you about that. Listen, I was about to ask you about that next.
So there are two different ways well, not two different ways, but there are different ways you have to approach a person with a disability. If their disability is obvious, housing providers shouldn't be asking you any questions. You have a person who you can look at them, you clearly can tell that they are visually impaired or they're blind. They have a seeing eye dog. There should be no question, but that's a service animal. That animal provides a service. It does something for the person with the disability. If you have a dog that predicts seizures and gets the person who owns the dog to a safe place prior to that seizure, that is a service. They open doors if they bring the EpiPen to the person. Those are service animals. They actually do something.
Right.
Emotional support animals just exist. That's all they need to do. So if a person's disability is obvious and you can see it, there should be no asking for verification of the disability. But emotional support animals are usually owned by individuals whose disability you cannot see. So there's some information that can be asked of that person to get that emotional support animal. It's not access to their entire medical record.
Mm-hmm.
Needs to be verification that that animal is in fact needed, and the need for the animal has to be related to the disability. The nexus has to be there, that connection.
Okay.
But that emotional support animal, all that that animal has to do is exist. But we want to be very careful, because here in the state of Florida, anybody that's falsifying some documents in order to get those animals, there can be some consequences for doing that. So the need for those animals tends to be a point of contention too often times between the person asking for the animal and the housing provider. And then they can't put additional burdens on folks. Like, they can ask you if the dog has to have a tag, or the animal must be vaccinated and have a tag under your local law. Then if they ask you for proof that you're complying with the law, there's nothing wrong with that. But if they're making you sign a service animal agreement and pay additional deposits and provide, certain things with regard to the animal, come bring us a fecal sample and all this other stuff. You must carry the dog through the lobby. You have to use the back door because you have they cannot impose those more burdensome rules and requirements on the person who has the animal. And that's too often where we're seeing, discriminatory practices happen with people who have the emotional support animals. And I have to say, individuals who do not truly have the need for the animals make it more difficult for people who live with disabilities and absolutely need emotional animals, service animals. So it's very important, that we're all complying with the law and making certain that people who live with disabilities and need these need service animals and emotional support animals get what they need.
Yes. So again, I'm glad we mentioned that because I know that has definitely been a hot topic as it relates to fair housing, emotional support, and service animals.
Yeah. And let me say this, this is my recommendation. This is the world according to Keenya. Don't go online and find somebody to that you meet one time for a few minutes and they give you a letter. Don't do that. People who have disabilities and are being treated for them often have someone who could say, this is a person, they have XY disability. I've been treating them this long and they're in need of this particular animal for this, because it ameliorates the effects of their disability, that sort of thing. So, my advice is always go straight to, there's a medical professional, a mental health professional, counselor that that somebody's been working with regard to their mental disability that requires, an emotional support animal for their well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Go there first.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get pushback and you're going to have a harder time when it's a service provider. And I know a lot of folks are doing telehealth, but I'm talking about, hey, let me go online and get this vest that says service animal. That's not a thing. So, this is my assistance animal. That's, the vest doesn't make it real, make it right. But when you're getting, and that certificate they'll give you in the mail because you were on that call for 15 minutes, don't use that. Don't go that route. You're going to make it harder for yourself. And it also, I think, impacts your credibility. And too often the housing providers take a harder position, and it's more difficult for the person to get what they truly need, which is presence of that emotional support animal.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you for addressing that. So as we get ready to wrap up our conversation, the last thing that I want you to address, and you and I talked about this, is some practical tips that folks can use as it relates to just their seeking housing opportunities and what they can do kind of proactively in maybe documenting things that are going on or that they experience.
Oh, absolutely. So if you are, let me say this,
Mm-hmm.
Florida has a two-party consent wiretap law, meaning you will violate the Florida wiretap law if you record somebody without their permission. You giving permission to record yourself is not enough. You need the other person's consent as well. You need two-party consent to record folks. So be very careful about recording conversations. But the things that you can record, you're moving into a place, take a little video of everything and what it looks like when you're moving in and before you move out, and get that good walkthrough. And that just helps a whole lot with your security deposits, and understand what the law is regarding your security deposit. Did that landlord keep your security deposit in an account separate from all monies? And did they give you an accounting of what they're subtracting from your deposit for? And did you receive that information in time? So make sure that they have a way to get in touch with you when you've moved out of a unit. Now, while you're living in housing, if you're experiencing harassment or discrimination of some kind, keep that diary. Keep all notices. If you're getting, you might get the first rule violation notice and you throw it away, you don't pay any attention to it. But then they start giving you, increased threats of punishment or even eviction. Anytime you get notices from your housing provider, hold on to those notices. Mm-hmm. If you have somebody that's witnessed, you ask them if they're willing to witness something. And if you can with your housing provider, it's in our investigations, it's kind of fun for me to see where people put stuff in writing, because everybody wants to text and email. So communicate via text, via email with regard to the things that are happening with you in housing. And, shoot an email saying, hey, thank you for that conversation today. I just want to confirm that this is what you said, or this is what we agreed to, or this is what I'm expecting to do. Please let me know if I got that wrong or if I got that right. But make sure that you are taking, you take pictures of things that you can take pictures of. You take video. Outside, you could take video, video recordings. There's no expectation of privacy, but do not record phone calls with folks. You got to have two-party consent. You will violate Florida's wiretap law. But where, you can take video of somebody outside vandalizing a car, using racial slurs against someone. We had a gentleman who had his Ring camera, and there were folks running around outside in front of his unit, yelling stuff, standing in front of his doorway, saying derogatory things, and he got him on the Ring camera. So, make sure your Ring camera is backed up, and that you save those videos if something happens.
So I'm gonna pause you there. So the Ring camera would be legit, even though you don't necessarily have their consent.
You're outside. There's no expectation of privacy when you're outside and in front of your door. Now, if you came in my house and we closed the door, you go into the leasing office and you're sitting at the desk behind, in somebody's office in the leasing office, there's an expectation of privacy, perhaps. Okay. But somebody you didn't, they're outside in front of your Ring camera.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I just wanted to just clarify.
The Ring cameras record, and folks know, but outside in the wide open, there's no expectation of privacy.
Okay. So
I have not seen any rejection of Ring camera video or video recordings of, folks outside hollering at somebody, saying things they shouldn't say, fussing at people's children, addressing other folks' children, those sorts of things. Okay. So, but don't record conversations, please.
Okay.
Don't go in, hide your phone recording. It should be stuff that you can do that, everybody will pull out that phone and record.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Outside. So.
Yes. All right. Very good. Well, this has been a great conversation. I see a few more folks have joined us. Miss Anna, thank you for being here. Miss Brittany, y'all are going to have to catch the replay.
Shout out to the 305.
Yes.
And I am a Nicole.
Yes.
I graduated from the Florida State University, but trust and believe I spent a whole lot of time on the campus of Florida A&M University as well.
On the highest level. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So Anna said, "What if they're in your house?" And so, as Kenya has said, if they're in your house, you have to get permission. Unless now, I don't know if she's asking if they're in your house.
Well, and
Look.
I want you all to be careful. I'm not going to give you open permission because every situation has some different circumstances. Um, Now, can you video record?
In-house camera.
You know, if there's video of them doing something, well, that might be all right. That's not you recording a conversation.
Mhm.
Wiretap, and if they're in your home. But recording, I'd be very mindful recording conversations because it's going to depend. And that's going to be the lawyer answer that you get. The lawyerly answer you always going to get is it depends, and you're going to have to look at the individual facts and circumstances. But if there are some, witnesses are great. There's absolutely no reason why you can't call. You know how people put some stuff on Facebook Live right quick,
Mhm.
or FaceTime with somebody so that they're present and you've got a witness.
Mhm.
That's different than secretly recording a conversation. So you just want to be very careful about what you do.
Mhm. Okay.
There's more than one way to skin a cat. Trust and believe.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, I want to give you an opportunity to give some closing remarks and tell folks how they can connect with you.
So we do travel the state of Florida. I will be in Tallahassee, in fact, probably in the summer with the Florida Commission doing some fair housing education. So,
Okay.
keeping if you visit our website, it's www.hopefhc.com. Hope FHC as in fairhousingcenter.com. There's more information for you there. Feel free to visit that website. We're on Facebook and Instagram. It's not me doing it, which is why there's actually something active and not taken down accidentally. But you know, when they talk about my heroes and sheroes in fair housing, I have to say this. There are lots of attorneys that do great work. There are people who who've argued and got great decisions. But I'm going to tell you that the real heroes and sheroes are those who stand up for their fair housing rights and for the rights of others and make real change. Because at the end of the day, the truth is, I get a complaint of housing discrimination. I work with a family or some people, and I get to go home. They go back home to the controversy. They go back home and live in, adversarial conditions. And they stand there and they fight, even after they've been harmed and their family's been harmed. So, I offer, my thanks to all who stand up and speak up when it comes to fair housing violations. Understand your rights, empower yourself with information, about your rights, whether you're dealing with a homeowners association, condo association, apartment. Read the rules, read the condo docs, read the homeowners association. Get familiar with your landlord tenant law. Legal services organizations usually put, and even some attorneys will put information out there on how you can advocate for yourself as a tenant. Like, what do I do with the security deposit? How do I withhold rent? Because there's a way to do that. Educate yourself. It's very empowering, and when you do that, people can't take advantage of you, and they will if you allow it. So again, just educate, empower, and I'm gonna push myself back to that old point that I made earlier on. Register to vote, get out there, vote, and understand who you're voting for and what you're voting for.
Absolutely. So y'all got it right here on Conversations with Nicole with attorney Keenya Robertson. This has been great. Thank you so much for taking some time today to talk with us about our fair housing rights. Many things that have taken place that, well, look, we weren't aware of, but we know now, right? Connect with her, connect with her, connect with her. I hope you all, the viewers, have found this to be beneficial. If so, let us know in the comments. We really appreciate your engagement, especially on this Thursday afternoon.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Fair housing is, again, not just in the month of April, but it is 365.
Absolutely.
365 every single day of the year. And while, oftentimes it may not be the hot and sexy topic, but if it happens to you, if you are discriminated against based on a housing need or concern, then you definitely want to have somebody like Attorney Robertson in your corner helping you fight that battle. So I see my mom has tuned in. She said, thank you, Ma. Miss Anna gave
Thank
us
you, Mother Everett.
yes. So let's keep this conversation going, y'all. Please, share this with a friend, somebody that you know that may be in need, that has experienced housing discrimination. I think oftentimes we just think, oh, that was just an unfortunate situation, but this person may have a history of doing this to folks. So you definitely want to explore what your options are. And as has already been said, educate yourself about your rights, the rules, the policies, the procedures, and everything that's out there. Okay. So Anna, great topic, community awareness. Thank you so much. Ishmael, great info. Thank you, my fellow Rattler freshman brother. I appreciate you. All right, good people. Well, the last of our series is next Thursday at 4 p.m. I have real estate professional Tiffany Hamilton, who is here in Tallahassee, who will join us to talk about fair housing as it relates to mortgage, getting homes, rental, all of that sort of thing. So you definitely want to be here for that. Well, this has been great. Again, thank you again. And we will see y'all next time. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you all so much. Take good care.
All right. Bye-bye.